Nyla Bennett stood at the window of her own office, watching the city lights come on one by one, and didn't pick up the phone the third time it rang. 6 investors had called that morning. 5 of them wanted reassurance. The 6th wanted out. On her desk sat a folder she hadn't opened yet, sent over by courier an hour ago, stamped with the name of a legal firm she didn't recognize. She already knew what was inside. A notice. The kind that ends companies. Behind her, the door opened. She didn't turn around right away because some part of her already knew who it was and some part of her didn't want to be right. "You should have told me," Nyla said quietly before the woman in the doorway said a word. "I did what I thought was necessary." "Who?" No answer came. Just the sound of the door closing again, softer than Nyla expected, softer than betrayal usually sounds. Nyla looked down at her phone. A name she hadn't seen in months lit up the screen, T. Hyun. She didn't answer that either. To understand how she got here alone, in an office with her name on the glass, watching everything she'd rebuilt start to slip through her fingers, you have to go back 6 months. To the morning she thought the hardest part was already over. Nyla Bennett's new company occupied the 14th floor of a building not far from where her old life had ended in a ballroom full of strangers. Her name was on the door in clean, simple letters. No embellishment. She hadn't wanted embellishment. She'd wanted proof. 6 months since the scandal that ended Kang T. Hyun's marriage, his reputation, and most of his family's business. 6 months since Nyla walked out of that ballroom holding evidence instead of a bouquet. She'd built something in the time since. Investors respected her. Employees trusted her. For the first time in almost a decade, nobody was managing her, protecting her, or deciding what she was ready to know. She believed the hardest chapter of her life was finished. If you're new here, hit subscribe. And if you've ever rebuilt your life from nothing and finally felt steady again, like this video, and comment, "Rebuilt" below. You're about to see how fast steady can disappear. Then Patris Odom called. "Nyla, I need you to come to my office." Patris's voice had none of its usual warmth. Nyla noticed that immediately, the way you notice a change in weather before you understand what it means. "Is something wrong with the filings?" "Just come in." Nyla arrived expecting routine paperwork, the kind of thing that had become normal since the company launched. Signatures, compliance reviews, the unglamorous mechanics of running something real. Instead, Patris placed a single sheet of paper on the table between them, old and slightly yellowed, the kind of document that had been sitting in a drawer for decades before anyone thought to scan it. Nyla looked down. Her mother's name. Beneath it, a figure that made her chest tighten before her mind had even processed why. $2,400,000 Kang Holdings. "Why?" Nyla said slowly. "Was my mother receiving money from the Kang family?" Patris didn't answer. Her expression had the particular stillness of someone who genuinely didn't know and was uneasy about not knowing. "Payment was made 27 years ago, Patris finally said. Nyla did the math without meaning to. "I wasn't even born yet." Nyla didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with her mother's old photo albums spread in front of her, searching for anything, a name, a date, a face she didn't recognize that might explain a payment that predated her entire existence. She found almost nothing. Her mother had worked, decades ago, with a Korean-American investment group. A handful of photographs showed her at conferences, at dinners, always slightly at the edge of the frame, the way people stand when they're present but not meant to be remembered. Every official record of her involvement had been sealed or deleted. 3 days later, an envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a single photograph, her mother, younger than Nyla had ever seen her, standing beside a man Nyla recognized instantly despite the decades between the photo and the man she knew. A much younger Kang D-sung. On the back, someone had written 7 words in careful handwriting. She trusted the wrong brother. Nyla's first thought was D-sung. Her second thought stopped her cold. D-sung had only one brother, Kang T-hyun's father. She found T-hyun 3 weeks later, and not because she'd been looking for him. He wasn't living the way she remembered. No driver waiting outside. No assistant hovering at his elbow. He worked out of a modest office in a converted building, alone, at a desk stacked with folders that looked like they belonged to a man rebuilding from almost nothing. For the first time since she'd known him, Nyla saw the person underneath the empire instead of the empire itself. She told herself that didn't matter. She placed the photograph on his desk without preamble. "Do you know this woman?" T-hyun looked down. Something shifted behind his eyes, recognition, and something heavier underneath it. "Nyla." His voice had lost its composure. "Where did you get that name?" Why does it matter? He hesitated long enough that the silence itself became an answer. Because my father told me never to ask about her. Nyla sat with that for a long moment. Tae-hyun wasn't completely ignorant. He never had been. He'd simply never known which questions to ask until she'd asked them for him. What Tae-hyun told her next reshaped everything she thought she understood about her own life. 27 years ago, there had been a dispute between two brothers over the direction of Kang Holdings. Di-sung wanted control kept close, contained, predictable. Tae-hyun's father wanted to expand internationally, faster than the family's finances could safely support. Nyla's mother had been brought in as part of that expansion, a financial consultant working alongside the family's international partners. She discovered something she wasn't supposed to find. Money moving between companies in patterns that weren't legal, no matter how carefully they'd been dressed up on paper. She threatened to expose it. Then she disappeared from the Kang family's world entirely. And shortly afterwards, she received $2.4 million. Was she paid to stay silent? Nyla asked. Tae-hyun didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it. I don't know, but I think you already suspect the answer. She did. The strange transfers in Nyla's own company started the following week, small at first. A vendor payment routed through an account she didn't recognize. A minor shareholder agreement amended without her signature appearing anywhere on the paperwork trail. She assumed clerical error. Then investors started calling with questions she hadn't authorized anyone to answer. Questions about ownership structure. Questions about whether her 18% stake in the old Kang Holdings carried obligations she hadn't disclosed. Someone was feeding information outward. Quietly. Consistently. Nyla's first suspicion was Tae-hyun. Old habits, old wounds, hard to unlearn. She was wrong, and she'd find out exactly how wrong sooner than she expected. The forgery came to light almost by accident. Nyla had asked Tae-hyun, cautiously, reluctantly, whether he still had access to the old company's internal records, the ones from before the scandal, before the board forced him out. He did. What he found inside them stopped them both. A signature authorizing the early termination of a trust. Nyla's name listed as the intended beneficiary. The trust itself created using a portion of the same $2.4 million her mother had received decades earlier, money that had been set aside for Nyla, meant to become accessible when she turned 30. Someone had terminated it early, 8 years ago, the exact year Nyla married Tae-hyun, the signature authorizing the withdrawal read. Kang Tae-hyun. Nyla's stomach turned. You knew about this. Never seen this document in my life. Your name is on it. Tae-hyun studied the signature for a long moment, something calculating replacing the panic in his expression. Look at the pressure points, the slant. That's not how I write my name. He turned the page toward her. Someone copied it. Nyla didn't want to believe him. She'd believed him before, and it had cost her a house and 8 years. But the forgery, once she looked closely, was undeniable, close, but not exact, the kind of copy someone makes from studying a signature rather than owning one. The money hadn't gone to Tae-hyun. It had gone into a private trust controlled by Kang Di-sung. Di-sung hadn't only manipulated Tae-hyun's marriage. He'd been using Tae-hyun's identity for years. Then, 3 days later, Di-sung died. Quietly, in a hospital room, before anyone could ask him the questions that mattered. But 2 days before that, he'd sent Nyla a single message. The only communication he'd sent since his arrest following the ballroom exposure. You think you destroyed the Kang family. You haven't even discovered what your mother knew. Nyla had dismissed it as manipulation, one last attempt to unsettle her. After his death, a package arrived at her office. Inside was an old key, tarnished with age, no note explaining what it opened. She had no idea yet how much that single key would end up costing her to understand. Yoon Seojin reached out the following week. Nyla hadn't spoken to her in months, not since the aftermath of the ballroom, since the quiet, complicated peace they'd made with each other after everything fell apart. Remembered something, Seojin said, when Nyla met her at a small cafe neither of them had been to before. From one of Di-sung's meetings, the one I told you about. The lawyer. There was someone else there too, a woman. I never learned her name. Seojin hesitated. I didn't think it mattered at the time. What do you remember about her? A brooch, antique, very distinctive. Seojin's eyes met hers. I only remember it because it looked expensive in a way that didn't match anything else she wore. Nyla went still. Her mother had owned a brooch exactly like that. She went home that night and searched through the last box of her mother's belongings she'd never fully unpacked. At the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper gone soft with age, she found an old photograph her mother, Sung. A man Nyla now recognized as Hyun's father, and a fourth figure, a woman, unnamed, standing slightly apart from the others, on the back, in her mother's handwriting. "If anything happens to me, don't trust either brother." Hyun finally understood what his father had never fully told him. Sung wasn't the mastermind. Neither was Hyun's father. The fourth woman in the photograph was Han Soo-jin, a financial strategist who had helped build the international arm of the Kang Empire decades earlier, quietly positioning herself behind shell companies and holding structures long before Sung ever touched them. Windrose Holdings, the company at the center of the original exposure, hadn't been her biggest operation. It had been one small piece of something far larger. And buried inside Nyla's own 18% stake was a fragment of that older structure, an asset the Kang family, or what remained of it, still desperately wanted back. That was when Nyla understood the strange transfers in her own company weren't clerical errors. Someone had been positioning themselves for months. And the person with the deepest access to Nyla's most important documents, the equity clause, the founding paperwork, every legal structure holding her new company together, was the one person Nyla had never once thought to question. If this story has your attention right now, make sure you're subscribed and drop a like. Then comment Team Nyla again below. This is the part where everything starts closing in. Patris called her into the office again on a Tuesday morning, and this time, there was no warmth in the invitation at all. "There are some provisions in your founding documents I think you should review again," Patris said, sliding a folder across the desk. Nyla read them slowly. Language she remembered signing, phrased in a way she now understood differently, a clause that, under specific conditions, transferred controlling authority over her company to a secondary trustee. Who's the secondary trustee? That's not important right now. It was important. Nyla just didn't say so yet. She took the folder home that night instead of leaving it at the office, and read it until 2 a.m, cross-referencing clause numbers against the original trust paperwork Hyun had pulled from the old company records. The one with the forged signature, the one that had led her to Sung's private trust in the first place. Buried on the final page, beneath a routine notarization block, was an authorization code. She recognized the format instantly. Every filing Patris had ever prepared for her carried the same code structure, the same registration prefix tied to Patris's license number. This code matched. Nyla sat with that for a long time before she called Simone, not to ask what to do, but just to say it out loud to someone who wouldn't flinch. "She's been in this from the beginning," Nyla said. "Not helping me." Positioning herself. "You sure? I have her signature on the authorization that created the secondary trustee clause. The same day she told me I could block Hyun's restructuring." Simone was quiet for a moment. "Nyla, I'm so sorry." "Be sorry yet," Nyla said. "I haven't confronted her." She brought the document to Patris's office the next morning and set it on the desk without a word. Patris looked down at it. Nyla watched her read the page slowly, watched her recognize exactly what she was looking at. "Tell me this isn't your signature," Nyla said, silence. "Patris." Patris didn't reach for the document. She didn't try to explain it away, didn't offer a version of events that might soften what was already sitting between them. "You want me to lie to you again?" she finally said. The words landed harder than any denial could have. "You were there when I had nothing, Patris," Nyla said quietly. "Exactly, Nyla." Patris finally met her eyes. "I was there before you had anything." Stood there for a moment, letting the sentence settle into everything it changed. "You didn't help me because you believed in me," she said slowly. "You helped me because you knew what my mother had hidden. You've been positioning yourself since before I even knew there was anything to find." Patris didn't deny it. The takeover moved fast once it started. Investors who had backed Nyla for months began quietly pulling their support. Legal notices arrived faster than she could read them. The trust structure Patris had helped embed into her founding documents activated exactly the way it had been built to, transferring operational authority to a party Nyla now understood was connected to Han Soo-jin. For the first time since the scandal that started all of this, Nyla felt the ground genuinely give way beneath her. Hyun found her in her office 2 days later, the black folder from the courier still unopened on her desk. "You don't have to trust me," he said. She didn't answer. Just let me stand beside you while you destroy the person who actually deserves it. Nyla studied him for a long moment, not the billionaire she'd married, not the man who'd once handed her paperwork with tabs already marking where to sign, but someone who had spent 6 months rebuilding something honest, with nothing to offer her now except help. "This isn't us getting back together," she finally said. "I know." Han Soo-jin came to her 2 days later, not with threats, but with an offer, a number large enough to make most people disappear quietly and never look back. Nyla refused without hesitation. Soo-jin smiled, the kind of smile that had clearly worked on someone before. "Your mother refused too." Nyla's expression didn't change, but something inside her went very still. "Your mother didn't just take $2.4 million and vanish," Soo-jin continued. "She was paid to disappear after she discovered what we'd done. But she didn't stay quiet. She built a second set of records, and she hid them somewhere none of us could find." "Where?" Soo-jin's smile widened. "That's the question, isn't it?" Nyla thought of the old Ki Di-sung had sent her days before he died. She thought of her mother's house, sold years ago, and the porch swing her mother used to sit on every evening after work. "If you ever lose everything, look where we used to sit." She contacted the new owners. They were confused, then curious, then willing, once Nyla explained enough to make the request make sense. Under the porch, buried in a sealed metal box, workers found what her mother had spent decades protecting. Financial records, photographs. A handwritten letter addressed to a daughter who hadn't been born when it was written. "My daughter, if you're reading this, the Kang family has finally found you." Nyla read the entire letter standing in her mother's old backyard, in the fading light, learning for the first time who her mother had actually been. Her mother hadn't taken hush money. She'd taken evidence, proof of financial crimes buried deep in the early Kang Empire, proof she intended to use once it was safe. She'd created a trust for Nyla instead, meant to protect her daughter from a family she never wanted Nyla connected to. She hadn't predicted that Nyla would marry into it anyway. Nyla confronted Han Soo-jin publicly. At an emergency shareholder meeting, Soo-jin had called to finalize the takeover. The evidence from the metal box filled the screen behind her. Decades of shell companies, forged signatures, the true architecture of a scheme that had outlived 2 generations of the Kang family. "My mother spent 27 years making sure the truth would survive her," Nyla said, her voice carrying evenly across the room. Soo-jin's composure finally cracked. "You should have asked yourself one question before coming after me," Nyla continued, stepping closer. "Did you really think her daughter would be easier to silence?" Security arrived within minutes. Soo-jin was escorted out as the room erupted into overlapping conversation, investors already reaching for their phones. The takeover collapsed within the hour. Nyla's authority over her own company was restored in full. Patris's role in it all came with consequences, though quieter ones than Soo-jin's. A quiet resignation, a legal review, a professional reputation that would never fully recover. Nyla didn't destroy her. She simply made sure Patris never had access to anything that mattered again. Nyla returned to her mother's old garden 3 days later, at Tae-hyun's invitation, though she almost didn't go. He'd restored it. Not extravagantly, carefully, the way someone repairs something they understand they can't fully replace. "You did this?" she asked. Tae-hyun nodded. "I can't give you back those years," she said. "Nothing. I can't give you back your mother, still nothing. And I know fixing a garden doesn't erase what I did." "Then why did you do it?" "Because for once," he said, "I wanted to give you something without asking for anything in return." Nyla looked at him for a long moment, not because she'd forgiven him. Because for the first time, he'd done something that wasn't designed to win anything back. "Maybe someday I'll believe you," she said. She walked away. He didn't follow her. For the first time, he let her choose. The next morning, Nyla walked into her company past her own name etched on the glass, Nyla Bennett, founder and CEO, and didn't stop to look at it the way she used to. Her phone buzzed once. One message from Tae-hyun, "Good morning." She looked at it for a long moment, a small, unreadable smile. She didn't respond. Sometimes the hardest part of surviving betrayal isn't learning who to trust again. It's discovering how far back the betrayal actually goes. If Nyla's story moved you, subscribe for more, like this video, and comment your favorite moment or your reaction to how it ended. New stories drop every week, and you don't want to miss what she uncovers next.